Okay, everybody, thank you all for coming. And I'm joined today by Senators Warner and Murray and Wyden and Casey, as well as our friends from the little lobbyists, who are the cutest here. What is your little son's name?
This is Ian.
Ian, who's nearly 5 months. What an alert, little, cute fella. Okay, so why are we here today? Well, we're here today because of Ian and so many others like him, and many who are older than Ian as well. Later this afternoon, Senate Democrats will force one of the most significant policy votes of the year, right in the middle of Republicans' ongoing efforts to sabotage health care for millions of Americans. Using Congressional Review Act powers, we will vote to repeal the Trump administration's 1332 waiver rule, a horrible rule that threatens the care of millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions. The Trump administration's rule lets states use taxpayer dollars, taxpayers' money, to fund junk health care plans that don't fully protect people with pre-existing conditions, don't cover essential benefits like prescription drugs and maternity coverage, and often have sky-high costs. Imagine you're a parent of a child with cancer. Your son or daughter has cancer. You're a mom or dad. You've bought one of these junk insurance plans, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Ma'am, sir, I have a medication or a procedure that could very well cure your son or your daughter, but your insurance coverage doesn't cover it, and it's very expensive." What do we tell that mom or dad? What do we tell that son or daughter? That should not happen in America, and that's why we're here today. By forcing a Senate vote, Democrats will try to undo some of the damage done by the Republicans, and we'll finally see if Republican actions will match what they say when it comes to pre-existing conditions. On the floor of this Senate, when they go home, they say, "We're for protecting pre-existing conditions." Well, here's the chance to do it. Don't just talk about it, do it. Do it now. Do it this afternoon. We hear President Trump and Republicans promise they have a great, amazing health care plan, but the only plan we see is to destroy pre-existing conditions and destroy pre-existing condition protections for millions of Americans. Look at everything happening now. Open enrollment for the ACA marketplaces start Thursday, but the Trump administration has eliminated funding, all but eliminated funding, to help people sign up and get the coverage they need. Republicans are pushing their lawsuit to strike down our entire health care law. Just yesterday, new data showed 400,000 fewer kids have health insurance now. Most of those kids are under six years old. No health insurance. They're innocents. Shouldn't they have it? The administration's making it harder and harder, and fewer get it. This all breaks your heart. The effect of sabotage is not just abstract, it's real. We Democrats have tried to stop at every opportunity to stop the sabotage, have urged Republicans to work with us, but Leader McConnell has buried bipartisan bill after bipartisan bill on health care in his legislative graveyard. But because of CRA, he can't stop a vote on this. We urge our Republican colleagues, do the right thing. Help put a stop to health care sabotage, the hypocrisy, the empty promises. Vote to repeal this horrible rule and save Americans' health care. Senator Warner. Where's your chart?
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Schumer. We're here today ahead of an opportunity to protect Americans from yet another effort by the Trump administration to undermine the ACA. In this latest effort to undermine the ACA, the Trump administration has put forward a rule that, as Senator Schumer already outlined, not only offers Americans junk plans, so-called short-term plans, we call them junk plans, that don't offer a series of benefits, but they've gone even further and through their regulatory process are actually allowing taxpayer dollars to be used to subsidize these junk plans. That puts in direct jeopardy the literally hundreds of millions of Americans, 3 million of the 8 million Virginians who have pre-existing conditions, those kind of protections that the ACA guaranteed. As been mentioned, these junk plans don't cover necessary benefits like maternity care or other essential benefits. And at the end of the day, this is an effort to undermine probably the most popular part of the ACA, the notion that said insurance companies cannot discriminate against folks with pre-existing conditions. Outrageously, and I've seen this in Virginia, and I'm sure my colleagues have seen it as well, we've seen these junk plans out there marketing themselves under the guise of Obamacare, with this notion that if you come in, it's a cheap price, people get sucked into buying these plans only to find out when they show up at the doctor or show up at the hospital that their so-called short-term plan covers virtually nothing. Now, we don't think that's right, and frankly, neither do the vast majority of the American people. Bipartisan majorities of Americans support protecting folks with pre-existing conditions. And that's why I think a number of my Republican colleagues have changed their mind. Now, in the last 2 years, they've tried and repeatedly failed to repeal the ACA. So, to my Republican colleagues, who, as Chuck indicated, go home and say they want to protect folks with pre-existing conditions, today they're going to have a clean up or down vote to see which side are you on. It really is a chance for my colleagues to go on record to try to stop the Trump administration's effort to dismantle this key protection. Now, I understand that some of my Republican colleagues will try to make this an abstract vote about 1332 waivers. Listen, as a former governor, I support the ability and flexibility for states to make improvements. But the 1332 waiver process, and Senator Wyden will go into this in more detail, was ways to actually improve quality and get affordable and greater affordability, not to undermine the basic protections for folks with pre-existing conditions. The truth is, the Trump administration effort is a direct effort to undermine the stability of the insurance market. And again, we keep coming back to this same theme. It is an effort to undermine the protections that Americans with pre-existing conditions currently enjoy in terms of getting access to health care. So we've not voted on a lot of items this year. I actually think this is probably the most important vote the United States Senate has taken in 2019. I hope at the end of the day, not only will my Democratic colleagues, but my Republican colleagues as well will be on the right side of the vast majority of Americans, and particularly those Americans, and we're going to hear some of those stories right now, of folks who, because of these protections, have managed to get through extraordinarily challenging circumstances. So now I want to bring forward one of the so-called little lobbyists, and that is a fellow Virginian, Samantha McGovern. So Samantha, and I will be one of your props here.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Samantha McGovern, and I'm here today to advocate with the little lobbyists for children like my daughter Josephine. She's almost 4 years old and wants nothing more than to play outside, ride and play with school buses, and be tickled until she laughs so hard she can barely breathe. She's alive and enjoying life today thanks to the protections set in place by the ACA. Her life didn't start that way. Her birth was a medical emergency. Josephine was born at 24 weeks gestation. When we found out I was pregnant, we never would have imagined that our firstborn would spend the first 13 months of her life in the hospital, requiring life-saving medications, treatments, and surgeries. Within the medical care, she wouldn't be the wonderful child she is today. From her birth to today, her medical expenses have billed over $9 million. Thanks to the ACA protections, her health insurance never once told us that we could no longer have coverage due to pre-existing conditions or lifetime caps. Not a day goes by that we are not in fear for her future and the impacts if she were to lose vital health care protections. At any moment, she could be robbed of the necessary medication care that allows her and all the children like her with complex medical needs and disabilities to survive and thrive. Just over a year after my daughter finally came home, my life got back to living a normal, happy life, when unexpectedly, we were hit and emotionally shattered by another life-threatening healthcare moment. We found out that my husband had stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, a type of cancer that was discovered after seeing a doctor for some back pain. Today, he is in remission thanks to his ability to receive quality health care. Our insurance allowed us to focus on his health, recovery, and not trying to pay the $100,000 out of pocket for the required treatments. We didn't see this coming now, and there would have been no way to predict this before making a health care insurance plan choice. But that wasn't the last phase of living a regular life full of fun, joy, and normal responsibilities. It was the hottest day this past July, and I had stopped for an iced coffee when the next thing I knew, I was waking up in an ambulance. I had thought that I had passed out due to dehydration and stress related to my daughter's medical needs. But what was discovered was a large tumor in my left temporal lobe. Two quick and terrifying weeks later, I would have a craniotomy surgery where I lied awake where cancerous tissue was removed from my brain. The fact that I'm here today, able to speak to you, is not only short of the benefits of science and modern medicine. Again, my family was very fortunate that we could focus our attention, my care, my medical needs, and the support my husband and my daughter needed, rather than the cost of my brain surgery that has billed out at just over $200,000. All 3 stories I have shared are mine. I now live them and are challenged by them every day. None of our unexpected diagnosis and medical paths were predictable. Brain cancer, like the type that I have, is aggressive, hard to treat, and not curable. But that doesn't mean that I don't deserve to live. It should not be legal for insurance to limit the type of health care it provides. People facing the worst diagnosis that there is to hear should be able to focus on care, not money. Without insurance that is safe from pre-existing conditions, excluding my daughter, my husband, and I wouldn't have received all the care that we needed and may not have survived. I deserve to survive as long as I can to continue to fight tooth and nail, not just for myself, but for my daughter, a young girl who will always require affordable, quality health care that does not discriminate because she was born with multiple pre-existing conditions and clearly has exceeded lifetime caps multiple times over. Like my family, your constituents and their children are counting on you to protect them by voting against short-term junk insurance plans. Americans might not be expecting the diagnosis that is coming for them tomorrow or the month after if they are permitted to sign up for hazardous insurance options that is designed to make money rather than to provide affordable quality care coverage. Their lives matter, my life matters, my husband's life matters, and Josephine's life matters. Almost every member of Congress, of the Senate, has promised to protect pre-existing conditions. Senators, the time has come for you to vote to match your promise. Today we are watching, and your vote will speak louder than your words. Thank you.
Senator Murray.
My pleasure.
Well, first of all, Samantha, thank you for your tremendous courage and your willingness to come here and speak today for your family, but in speaking for your family, speak for so many people across this country. It is so wrong that the United States government could be the obstacle to you and your family having the life and health care that you deserve. No one should be allowed in this country to buy a health insurance plan that in the very fine print it says we don't take care of you. And that's why we're here today. We are putting Republicans' health care charade to an end and putting every single senator on the record as to whether they stand with our patients and families or President Trump and big insurance companies. Because despite Republicans' empty claims to fight for families' health care and protections for pre-existing condition, we have seen time and time again, from their efforts to jam through their harmful Trump Care bill to their support for President Trump's partisan lawsuit, which could strike down those protections for pre-existing conditions and strip health care away from families across our country. There is no greater cheerleader for President Trump's relentless attacks on families' health care and no greater obstacle to passing solutions to repair that damage than Senate Republicans. Democrats in the House and the Senate have offered countless solutions to protect our families' health care. But so far, Republicans have decided to bury each of our proposals in their legislative graveyard and hide from actually going on the record and letting families they represent know who they are fighting for. Not today. Today, Democrats are forcing a vote on legislation Leader McConnell cannot bury. Our bill will reverse President Trump's rule, which warps the waivers meant to encourage innovation so that he has them encouraging states to increase families' health care costs, eliminate protections for people with pre-existing conditions, undermine essential health benefits, and promote harmful junk insurance plans that can charge vulnerable patients more and cover less. In short, President Trump's rule is bad news for patients and families and good news for insurance companies. Our vote to overturn this harmful rule offers a very straightforward test that will make clear once and for all who is actually fighting for our families' health care and who is attacking it. I believe issues like this are too important for us to put party first. I hope all of our colleagues in the Senate on both sides agree. I hope Republicans think long and hard today about the promises they keep making to their constituents and how they're going to look them in the eye after this vote. I hope they choose today to finally do the right thing. Stand up for patients. Stand up for Samantha and her family and so many like them, even if it means being a Republican that's willing to take a stand finally against President Trump. That's what's at stake today, and that's what we're fighting for, and that's what this vote will show. So thank you all very much for being here, and I'm delighted to turn it over to Senator Wyden, who's been my partner in writing this to begin with and getting it passed and fighting for it every day. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Senator Murray and Leader Schumer and Samantha. I mean, you've made the point that in a country as rich and strong as ours, we ought to be moving forward. I mean, that's what our discussion is all about, is how do we move forward? And you've laid out why it is so repugnant to be talking about moving backward. And I just want to take a minute to kind of walk people through how we got here, because Senator Murray and I, we share the jurisdiction on these issues. People in coffee shops are not having debates about, complicated rules. But we worked very hard for an idea that once had strong bipartisan support. And that idea was that a state could get a special waiver to offer health care coverage that was more affordable for you and better for you. We are here this morning because the Trump administration has turned that good idea into a house of horrors. It is a key part of their plan to deny Americans the ironclad, loophole-free protections for pre-existing conditions that they count on today. And they do it by just flooding the market with this junk insurance that reminds me of my days when I was director of the Gray Panthers, and people would just sell trash to senior citizens because they could get away with it. So I'm so glad to be here to support Senator Warner and my colleagues. And I want to just walk through, as I wrap up, one point, and I'm so glad that my Finance Committee colleagues, Senator Warner and Senator Casey, have been part of this effort, is that what the Republicans are trying to do is add salt to the wound by saying taxpayer dollars can be used to subsidize junk insurance. So in effect, you've got a taxpayer subsidy that gets pocketed by unscrupulous insurance companies as pure profit. So picture this in America. If you're a person in the Pacific Northwest struggling to pay for health care, you ought to know that Donald Trump wants you to have crummy health care coverage that actually pads the insurance company's bottom line with your tax dollars. And obviously, people don't know about all these technical rules, but they sure know what a ripoff looks like. We can walk you through other parts of the bill where they have sort of twisted and turned the language of what was supposed to make care better to make it worse. For example, they rewrote the rules to say that people must, quote, have access to health care. Well, the fact is, when you hear the word access, watch out, because the word access with this Trump crowd is a watchword for empty promises, deceit, and the fact that you aren't going to get any real coverage. So I urge my colleagues to support the Warner legislation. I want it understood that the two committees that have looked at this in detail think that this is enormously important, because this will be the day when people will see in the United States Senate who is there for patients and families, who wants them to have real coverage where they're protected from discrimination against pre-existing conditions, and who just basically is happy to turn back the clock to the days when health care was for the healthy and wealthy. So I'm proud, as I say, of the Finance Committee's representation here, led today by Senator Warner, and I, like in the lingo of the Senate, I yield to our finance member, Senator Casey.
I want to thank Senator Wyden and Senator Murray. I want to thank Senator Warner for leading this effort today, where Republicans have a chance, and a chance in the full view of the United States to make the right vote. They have a chance, and it's a very simple choice. It's a choice as to whether or not they're going to stand and fight against the Trump administration and the policies that they've put into place just in the last 2 years, which is against the interests of families. So they can stand with the Trump administration, or they can stand with families like Samantha's. And Samantha, I want to thank you and your family for your willingness not just to be here today and to tell your family story, but also to bear witness to the truth of what's happening and what has happened in a country where we made a great advancement on health care. Not just that coverage was provided to more than 20 million people in a little more than 6 years. That alone was an advancement. But we also advanced on the protections provided to tens of millions more by way of making sure that if you have a pre-existing condition, you can't be denied coverage or treatment because of that pre-existing condition. I think there's not just a consensus, an overwhelming consensus in the country. So anyone fighting against that, anyone sending us backwards, anyone who wants to go back to the dark days of the past where families were disadvantaged and discriminated against, better have a good explanation for why they support that. I hope our Republican colleagues today will stand with Samantha and stand against the administration. Several of our colleagues today and others have talked about these junk plans, which can be terribly destructive in the life of a family. One of the reasons why families end up with these junk plans is because the administration gave more time for the purveyors of junk to present online and in other places these plans that get them in trouble. I issued a report yesterday which we entitled "The Healthcare Sabotage Online, a Warning to Consumers." On page 3 of this report, it has 3 basic findings, but on the 3rd page we actually outline tips to avoid enrolling in a junk plan. I won't go through those. You can take a look at those. But there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of misleading advertising out there. Sometimes someone will go online and they'll see healthcare.gov and they think, okay, I'm connecting now to the government, to a government website, and even though it might say it at the top of the page, they end up clicking on something else, and then they're down a road that they don't want to be down. We've heard evidence just yesterday from testimony of a Pennsylvanian who was told on the telephone that the coverage he was provided in this junk plan would be better than what he'd be provided by healthcare.gov. It was a lie. And that's the kind of fraud and scamming that's going on right now. So even in this week, when we're urging people starting Friday, November 1st, to take advantage of the open enrollment period, which itself has been reduced to 6 weeks by the Trump administration, another example of sabotage. We have to make sure that they know what's at stake this week with this vote. It's very simple. There are only two choices here. You stand with families, or you stand with the Trump administration. And I'm grateful that Samantha and so many others, including the little lobbyists, are giving voice to these concerns.
Thank you, Senator Casey. Thank you for the great work you've done on that report to consumers. So many issues, particularly around kids. Bob Casey's at the lead. I want to thank Senator Murray and Senator Wyden. Samantha, thank you for telling your extraordinarily powerful story. And while we didn't hear, this is young Ian over here, who is one of our little lobbyists as well. So with those, we'll be happy to take a couple questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, so far, no state has taken advantage or indicated that it's interested in taking advantage of these expanded 1332 waivers. So given that they aren't in effect and plans to put them into effect in any state whatsoever, doesn't that undermine kind of your claims that this is a harmful regulation and that this is active?
I want to let Ron speak to this as well. But absolutely not. Remember this ability to offer these junk plans was both some manipulation around 1332, but also change in certain Department of Labor regulations. You know, the fact that in my state, similar to what Senator Casey indicated, I can show you in Hampton Roads signs disproportionately in low-income African-American communities that are broadcast saying Obamacare, really cheap prices, but as Bob Casey said, you call, you sign up, you get this plan, you then show up at the doctor, you show up at the hospital, and nothing is covered. This is a result of the Trump administration. They could not repeal the ACA through a legislative process, through backdoor regulatory schemes, they've been trying to undermine the most popular part of the ACA, which is the protections for pre-existing conditions. You know, there's a lot of this stuff that sometimes, as we've all indicated, gets complicated by the rules, regulations. This is as clear-cut a vote as we will have in the United States Senate today. In this whole calendar year, you're either for these families who've got pre-existing conditions and putting those protections, or you're siding with the Trump administration. Ron, you want to add a little flavor more?
Not only is Senator Warner right in that already the Trump people have sort of given a jump start to the movement to sell this junk insurance, this is the next step. And again, we're going to keep coming back to how they took something that had an idea, that had bipartisan support. Some of the senior Republicans today in the United States Senate were for this concept when they signed on to another bill. We Democrats know how to use this special rule to help people like Samantha. What we want, for example, is states to use it for ideas like reinsurance, which is something that several states have already used in order to make existing dollars stretch further, improve coverage, and hold down costs. But as Senator Warner correctly said, the Trumpers have already given a big jump start to the movement to sell this stuff that isn't worth much more than the paper it was written on. And with this effort, they just want to keep building on it.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
So, forgive me for sounding pessimistic, but you sound very confident that this is kind of a no-brainer, and given that so many, bipartisan supported bills, like I think especially gun control, you can probably point to, have been blocked by Senator McConnell and various Senate Republicans. I'm just wondering why this would be any different. What about this issue you think would...
I want Senator Murray and Senator Casey to add, but, you're right. There's a host of legislative items that would get 70, 80, 90 votes. I've spent a lot of time, along with Ron Wyden again, on protecting our democracy. Why would we ever make protecting our democracy a partisan issue? But because the majority leader in the White House doesn't want the Senate to vote on it. The only reason, there's no way that the majority leader would actually want the Senate to vote on this legislation. It is simply because the fact that the Trump administration couldn't get its goal through a legislative process of repealing the ACA, so they've gone at it through this kind of arcane regulatory process. They've used this tool in the past to force votes. This time, we're turning that tool on them, and end of the day, Americans are going to be able to see who really stands up for folks with pre-existing conditions. And that's why virtually every major healthcare group, the groups who fight for folks with diabetes, I got a daughter with juvenile diabetes, folks who fight for groups with healthcare, cancer, they have been making clear to all of our Republican colleagues, they view this vote as a key vote. So you can obfuscate, but when every major healthcare group has said this may be the most significant vote the Senate takes on healthcare, we'll have a chance to check out where people stand. Senator Murray, Casey, you want to add anything?
I'll just add a quick comment. We've been trying since Republicans started saying that they were for protecting pre-existing conditions within health insurance, to put them on the record because all of their actions go the other way. This is a tool that we can finally use to say, okay, if you really want to protect pre-existing conditions, vote with us today. We'll see where the votes are. I'm hopeful that they will put their money where their mouth is on this vote. None of us know yet how the vote will turn out, but I think it's really important in this day that we show people where people actually are rather than hiding behind a majority leader who doesn't bring a bill to a floor or words that they speak at a rally or whatever. This counts. This is it.
I would just add that when you consider the whole range of issues here, for Republicans, there are three basic threats to healthcare right now. I'd call them the triple threat. One is the lawsuit. That's the most near-term and consequential threat to healthcare. It'll wipe out the entire law by declaring it unconstitutional, and it is more likely to prevail than not. So that's threat number one. Threat number two is what we're talking about today. One example of many of sabotage. Number three are the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. So if you're a Republican and you claim to support protections for pre-existing conditions that they all say they support, you should have to answer three questions. Do you support the lawsuit? Do you support the sabotage? Do you support the budget cuts? And if you say no to all three, then what are your affirmative steps? Have you filed an amicus brief or filed some kind of motion in court to be against the lawsuit? In other words, what are you doing about it? Because there's no way you can say with integrity that you support these protections when you're doing nothing about it. In fact, you're worse than that. You're supporting policies that will destroy completely the protections we have in place now. So there's three good questions for you to ask Republicans. What about, do you support the lawsuit, sabotage, and the budget cuts? Second thing I'd say about this particular issue is the only reason we're here talking about junk plans, part of what we're discussing today, is because the administration changed the rule. The old rule was 3 months for these plans as a very quick transition from one type of coverage to another. They enlarged that to 1 year. So by enlarging it to 1 year, by rule of this administration, they gave the purveyors of junk a lot more time to do what they do. It's worse than that, though. This rule allows them to extend it year after year. So now you went from a country where junk plans had 3 months of opportunity to 3 years if that individual keeps extending it. So that's why you're having more and more people who are unsuspecting and are getting insurance that's not providing the coverage that they thought they were getting. So this is a good opportunity for Republicans. We're doing them a favor by giving them the chance to push back against what the administration's been doing. Let's see if they take it.
One last point on your issue of these issues are complicated and why do you hope that you're going to prevail. Senator Murray was on the floor last night at 6 p.m. walking people through what this is all about. I've been working on these issues since I was director of the Gray Panthers. I had a full head of hair and rugged good looks. And I'd be the first to tell you, healthcare lingo is a Byzantine world unto itself. But what my colleagues have done is put this into plain and simple English, because nobody knows anything about 1332, having been the lead author on it. I've been trying to explain it for years. I'm thrilled that my colleagues here, members of the Finance Committee, and you can't get a more powerful presentation that Samantha has given, have taken this out of the clouds of insurance lingo and insurance talk and said, this is what it means to people. And if we don't prevail on this, this goes literally back to the days when healthcare was for the healthy and wealthy. That's what you had when you could discriminate against somebody with a pre-existing condition. Because if you were healthy then, you didn't have anything to worry about. If you were wealthy, you could cover it. And then we put in place in the ACA airtight, ironclad protection for people who had a pre-existing condition. So I want to say to my colleagues, Senator Warner and Casey, Murray, Schumer, and all, buttressed by Samantha, what they have done is the key to really protecting the public. And that is to take this Byzantine language of healthcare that lawyers and economists and others talk about and say, this is what it means for people. And Samantha couldn't have said it more clearly, and that's what the vote at 12:15 is all about.
Well, let me, last question, and let me also just, again, thank Samantha. We all hear stories, but to have a family where your child, your husband, yourself are all hit with kind of a triple whammy, and I think it's safe to say, I think you said it as much better than any of us. So you gotta have a right to live, you gotta have a right to prosper, you gotta have a right to have your family protected and not discriminated against with these pre-existing conditions. And I just hope all my Republican colleagues would listen to Samantha's story. Last question.
I know yesterday you didn't have a vote count, but do you have any commitments or indications from any Senate Republicans that they're going to?
You know, there have been some in the past who have not only said they support protections for pre-existing conditions, but voted that way. You know, on this time, we thought it was, at least I thought it was best, let's leave it with the stories they're going to hear from their own folks, from their own states. Let's leave it to all of the healthcare advocacy groups, for the most part, who are all making this, in kind of Washington speak, a key vote. I'm hopeful they'll do the right thing. I am hopeful they won't hide, as Ron has said, behind some of the kind of arcane rulemaking. You know, end of the day, this is probably the cleanest chance we'll have this year to go on record whether you support Samantha's right to get access to health care or whether you want to go back to the days when an insurance company, my goodness, could deny not only her, her child, and her husband health insurance. Simple as that. We'll see you at the vote. Thank you all.
So to 112,
like, yeah, like near my desk. Okay. I have actually never done this before, but I think just, well, it was like this whole situation, so they need to just like unscrew it and like collapse. Like these come apart, maybe? Yeah, these come apart.